The most infamous serial killer of all time. Jack the Ripper terrorizes the back streets of Victorian London, slashing and mutilating his victims. But for over 100 years, the Ripper has never been identified. Now, modern criminal profiling is unearthing clues which could turn the case on its head. Recreating the crime scenes and trawling the files to reveal the key suspect that everybody missed, we open the mystery files on Jack the Ripper. In the years 1888 to 1891, 11 women are killed in the notorious Whitechapel area of East London. 5 of the murders bear horrific similarities, so are attributed to the same anonymous murderer. The victims are all prostitutes. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. This intense killing spree of street workers runs from August to November, then stops as abruptly as it starts. Over the years, there have been many theories about the killer, from the Freemasons to a royal physician, and even one of Queen Victoria's grandsons. But despite these 5 murders being re-examined hundreds of times before, investigators believe each of them still holds hidden clues to the real culprit. Pat Brown is now applying 21st century profiling techniques to the Ripper case.
Criminal profiling is really about doing everything scientifically, examining all the evidence, the physical evidence and the behavioral evidence, and then determining exactly what happened at that crime scene and exactly what kind of person committed that crime.
The murders start on August the 31st, 1888. Mary Ann Nichols is found in Bucks Row, across the road from the London hospital. Her throat is cut, and her groin and torso repeatedly stabbed. It seems a motiveless crime, but profiler Pat Brown thinks the location conceals something about the killer.
The London hospital treated a lot of people for syphilis, and they kind of had an emergency room there. So it is interesting that she was near the hospital.
Syphilis is rife in London, and Whitechapel, a haunt of casual prostitutes and migrant workers, is no exception. Professor Bob Peckett is a forensic psychiatrist.
Jack the Ripper might have suffered from a sexually transmitted disease such as syphilis. Now, syphilis was certainly endemic amongst the community in the East End of London and not limited to the prostitute community.
In the 1880s, syphilis has no known cure. It can lead to madness and death.
It's possible that Jack, having gone to the hospital for treatment for syphilis, was very frustrated when he came out.
Prostitute Mary Ann Nichols would be an easy target for his rage. The second fatality, Annie Chapman, is found 9 days later on September the 8th, less than a kilometre away in Hanbury Street. Like Nichols, she is a middle-aged prostitute. And like Nichols, her throat is cut. But when the police examine Chapman's body, they find it's been sliced open and her uterus is missing.
The question of the body parts is, of course, very perturbing. Men who commit this sort of offence take trophies to remind them to produce an immediacy, a tactical, physical and sensual connection with the crime and the victim.
But removing a woman's uterus is very unusual.
In this case, the perpetrator has worked up from the stabbing and the mutilation to removing whole body parts, and not only body parts, but the very central essence of womanhood.
The slashing of another street worker shocks the nation. The press sensationalized the story. They immediately connect Annie Chapman's murder to the Nichols case. Although the term serial killer is not coined until the 1930s, journalists report on Whitechapel's mass murderer and whip up hysteria around the case. Letters from the killer are even faked by reporters to push up their circulation. One of these, sent on September the 25th, is how the murderer gets his name. It is the press who dub him Jack the Ripper, because of the distinctive mutilation he inflicts on his victims. Just 3 days after the letter arrives, panic in Whitechapel reaches unprecedented levels, as 2 more prostitutes are slain on the same night.
Elizabeth Stride was killed about an hour before Catherine Eddowes. Her throat was cut, and there was a general belief that the murderer had been disturbed by people who were going to a nearby social club and had left the victim and then gone on to murder Catherine Eddowes.
Even though Elizabeth Stride is not mutilated, her crime scene can still offer critical leads for criminal profilers. Stride was killed right outside the International Working Men's Educational Club, here on Berner Street.
Now, what's important about this is that serial killers oftentimes kill where they just happen to be at.
The club is host that night to a meeting about Judaism and socialism.
If Jack was over at this particular meeting that night, that rally, and would get him riled up. So as he comes out and he's furious, yes, society's treated me badly, he sees the prostitute and attacks.
Pat Brown believes further clues to the Ripper's identity can be gleaned from his second murder on the night of September the 30th. Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square.
People ask, is there a reason for a criminal profile to go to a location? And the answer is yes. Even though this happened years and years ago, and this isn't the original crime scene, but we can see enough that we can really understand why Jack picked this location. From this spot, he can look straight down that passageway and see if that police officer is coming, because he's got a viewpoint right here.
Eddowes' murder is truly gruesome. Her throat is cut, her body disemboweled, and for the first time, the victim's face is slashed. Some experts have claimed that this shows Jack's increasing frenzy. But Pat Brown has another perspective on how the scene plays out.
He put her toward this wall because he knew he wanted to cut her throat and he wanted the blood to go away from him. He was trying to strangle her, put her in like a sleeper hold, which basically knocks people out. But what is happening is she was struggling. She's moving hair like that. He's got his knife in his hand and he's trying to keep control of her. And finally he does. She passes out and he goes and he cuts her throat like this. But as one can see, if one turns the head, you can see there is damage to the face. So most likely all the face damage came from the struggle as he was trying to bring her to the ground.
Catherine is finally dead, but Jack is not yet fulfilled. For the second time, the Ripper removes the deceased woman's uterus. Jack has vanished by the time Eddowes is found by the police. But he leaves two more clues. A piece of Eddowes' apron is discovered in a neighbouring street, and on a wall above it are words scrawled in chalk. It is thought at the time to just be anti-Semitic graffiti, so as not to associate it with the Ripper and incite racial violence. It's immediately removed by the police. But a fresh examination of the words noted in police reports of the day reveals it may well have been the work of the killer. Donald Rumbelow has published extensively on the Ripper case.
The writing on the wall in Goulston Street, what was written inside this doorway were the words, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." My own feeling is that it was written by Jack the Ripper. There was the message, there was the blood-stained apron from Catherine Eddowes on the floor below it. So I do believe that message was written by Jack the Ripper.
An inability to feel remorse and accept blame is typical in psychopaths. Early that night, the Working Men's Club meeting may have inflamed Jack's sense of injustice.
The Stride incident was outside a particular club that had a Jewish rally that night. Now, if Jack took this to heart, if he was there, he might still have that in his head. So he still has that rage he wants to tell society about. And he thinks, everybody blames me for everything. They're blaming me for nothing. And so he goes to write on the wall.
Pat Brown agrees with Rumbelow that the words are scrawled by the killer, and she feels the spelling and grammatical mistakes are also consistent with Jack's brain, deteriorating due to venereal disease.
I believe it was just Jack sort of losing his own cognitive skills, and he was writing that, both from his syphilis and from his rage.
Liz Stride's murder outside a Jewish socialist rally and the writing on the wall lead Pat to believe that the Ripper may be a Jewish tradesman. But religion is just as sensitive now as in 1888.
Serial killers come from all races. They're white, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're everything. Because quite frankly, psychopathy doesn't know just one group of people. So in this particular instance, I think that Jack the Ripper is Jewish, but being Jewish has nothing to do with being Jack the Ripper.
Pat Brown's profile is taking shape. A Jewish tradesman suffering from a degenerative brain disease. After 4 horrific murders, there is immense public pressure. But the climate of fear is about to intensify. On November the 9th, 6 weeks after the double killing of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes seemed to have signalled the end of Jack's orgy of killing, 25-year-old prostitute Mary Kelly is hacked to pieces in her bed. But the nature of the crime brings criminologists to question if it is committed by the same man who took the lives of the 4 other victims.
This particular case is so different from the other 4, you have to wonder if it is the same person. The other 4 were all outdoor crimes. This was an indoor crime. The other 4 were done in just a few minutes. This one, he took his time.
Kelly's murder takes place inside. The crime scene left undisturbed. By recreating the room from photos and police reports, Pat Brown deduces that she probably knew her killer.
What I find interesting is the clothing on the chair. This is Mary Kelly's clothes, nicely folded up and placed there. Now, if Mary had been coming in with her client and it had been Jack, and Jack usually is in a rush. Jack just likes to jump out, grab the woman, and he kills her within seconds. And yet, we see her clothes folded on the chair. So either she took all her clothes off while this man waited patiently, then they got in bed, and then he killed her. Perhaps it was already in her frock. Somebody knocked the door, she knew who it was. She lets him into the room, and something goes wrong, and he kills her.
Kelly was last seen alive at 2 a.m. Witnesses claim to have caught sight of her with 2 clients already that night. And from her clothes and boots inside the room, it looks like she was ready to go to bed. But she did not go to sleep. The dots show the location of Mary's body parts. Underneath her head is a breast, a kidney, and her uterus. Her liver is between her feet. her spleen to the side of her. On the table are piles of flesh from her abdomen and thighs. The black dot represents her heart that is recorded as simply missing. Kelly's face is horribly disfigured. She is almost unrecognizable. Her mutilated features reinforce Pat Brown's view that she knew her killer.
There was a sheet that was laid over her, seemed to look like it was laid over her face. There were cuts in it. And if it was somebody who knew Mary, you wouldn't want to look at her when he did that. You could do just this kind of thing and not have to actually see what he was doing.
The newspapers had described how Jack's previous victim, Catherine Eddowes, had her face slashed. This new twist is reported in graphic detail. Mary's uterus is also left at the scene. This is the organ Jack prizes and most often takes away.
I think Jack the Ripper committed only the 4 outside scenes, and this one, Mary Kelly, was done by somebody else who just wanted us to believe that Jack did this too.
There is one final vital difference between Mary Kelly's death and the 4 other fatalities attributed to the Ripper that could have hindered police in their quest to crack the crimes and identify the killer. The police reports from the earlier murders speculate that the way the bodies are cut up indicates the Ripper could be a butcher. Whereas Kelly's autopsy report records that the perpetrator has no anatomical knowledge, throwing police off the possible killer's scent.
I've always felt that it was somebody like a butcher or a slaughterman who's got the necessary skills to extract these organs.
Well, who could walk through the streets more easily with a little bit of blood on him than a butcher?
Following this line of inquiry, there is a suspect who has been missed by the investigators. A man the police at the time were aware of, but chose to ignore.
When I look at all the possible suspects that we know of, the one I really look at very, very closely is a man by the name of Jacob Levi. Now, Jacob Levi was a butcher, and he was a Jewish tradesman.
Jacob matches Pat Brown's profile of the Ripper's race and profession, but he also fits with another theory the police use to solve modern crimes. Geo-profiling techniques predict that the killer lives within the circle of murders. Jacob Levy lived on Fieldgate Street, then moved to a butcher's premises on Middlesex Street. Both are in the Ripper's killing grounds.
If you have a butcher's shop and a key to it, you can slip right back through the streets, right onto Middlesex, which is right in the middle of these crimes, slip into your butcher's shop, you can hide your little treasures in the butcher's shop, and then wash up and go straight home.
And analysis of a statement given by his wife suggests his mind is in a disturbed state.
His wife said, yes, I was having problems with him. He was failing in the business. He wasn't doing his job anymore, and he's wandering all over the streets all night long. I don't know where he is.
Before the killings, Levy had been jailed for stealing meat from his boss. It seems a minor offence, but psychiatrists think it could be another indicator.
There would be signs. Perhaps he would tell lies for no apparent reason or cheat people out of small trifles. He might be dishonest in petty ways, stealing small sums from employers.
And investigations have now also discovered that Jacob Levy had venereal disease.
He was a married man with some children, but he had syphilis.
Jacob's death certificate confirms that he dies from syphilis, which he could have contracted on the streets of Whitechapel. Syphilis takes his life in 1891, just 2 years after the Ripper killings. In his final medical report, he claims to hear strange noises and says he's compelled to do immoral deeds. Hearing noises or voices urging you to act is a symptom of psychosis from late-stage syphilis. And syphilis could also be a reason why the fourth prostitute, Catherine Eddowes, may indeed have been the Ripper's last victim. The disease would eventually rob him of the ability to carry out these well-orchestrated attacks. But there is another equally credible reason why he might have stopped killing so abruptly. A fellow local Jewish tradesman, an eyewitness, called Joseph Chaim Levy.
Joseph Levy was sort of one of the three men who saw Eddowes with her murderer. He appeared very unhelpful. Said that he couldn't identify anyone, but whenever he was spoken to, he always gave the impression that he knew a lot more than he'd actually said.
It's really interesting when Joseph Chaim Levy didn't really want to describe the man that could be Jack the Ripper. I believe it's because he recognized that man, and that man could have been Jacob Levy, because they're both butchers. We're working right near each other.
Joseph Levy's butcher's shop is only 55 meters from the suspects. Joseph kept very quiet, but he did give the police one intriguing piece of information that now seems to point the finger at his colleague.
The one interesting thing that Joseph Levy did say about Jack the Ripper was that he was just 3 inches taller than the victim of Catherine Eddowes. Jacob Levy was 5'3", and the victim, Eddowes, was 5 foot.
Joseph's estimated difference of 3 inches is less than that given by other eyewitnesses, but they gave actual heights, which are harder to judge. His description matches Jacob. As investigators have now revealed, he also fits many of the criteria modern criminal profilers would expect to see in Jack.
My conclusion that Jacob Levy was Jack the Ripper and committed the 4 outside crimes, I'm fairly sure about. All the evidence does support this more than anybody else out there.
This new Ripper candidate has the perfect motive if he contracted syphilis from prostitutes. He also lives right in the middle of the murder sites. He has a shop near the crimes to clean up and hide organs in. His death certificate proves his illness is sufficiently advanced for him to be classified as clinically psychotic. And he is a Jewish tradesman, adept with a knife, and with a basic knowledge of anatomy. The evidence makes a compelling case for Jack the Ripper being the butcher of Whitechapel, Jacob Levy.